There is no frigate like a book to take us lands away, nor any courser like a page
Faith is
of
fine
dancing
invention
poetry.
for gentlemen who see, but microscopes are
Because
prudent
I could
in an
not stop
emergency.
for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves
I heard a
and
fly
immortality.
buzz when I died. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the
Wild
air
nights,
between the
wild
haze of
nights,
storm.
were I with thee? Wild nights should be our
It was
luxury.
not death, for I stood up, and all the dead lie down. It was not night, for all the bells put out their
Nature
tongues.
is what we know, yet have no art to say. So important our wisdom is to her simplicity. Emily Dickinson was born in 1830 in the small college town of Amherst, Massachusetts. Her family was prominent and well off. As a child, she attended Amherst Academy, where she studied Latin, theology, geology, botany, and astronomy, among many other subjects. Even though Emily refused to make a formal declaration of faith, religion still played a fundamental role in her life and poetry. Many of her poems are composed along the lines of church hymns which use the ballad meter. By the late 1860s, Dickinson withdrew from public life. She would rarely leave the house, spoke to callers from behind a door, and sent poems or flowers in her place when visitors came to visit. This also became her most productive period, as she revised old poems and wrote new ones to compile into fascicles. With regard to motivation, it is known that Dickinson thought of herself as a poet and did want to be appreciated. However, as she explained, publication was as foreign to her thoughts as firmament to Finn. With that said, let's dive into one of her most famous poems, poem 214, I Taste a Liquor Never Brewed. I taste a liquor never brewed from tankards scooped in pearl. Not all the Frankfurt berries yield such an alcohol. Inebriate of air am I and debauchee of dew, reeling through endless summer days from inns of molten blue. When landlords turn the drunken bee out of the foxglove's door, when butterflies renounce their drams, I shall but drink the more. Till seraphs swing their snowy hats and saints to windows run, to see the little tippler leaning against the sun. In this poem, Emily Dickinson writes about the beauty of nature. The very first line of the poem is a paradox. How can one taste something that was never brewed? As we read further, we find that this dissonance underlays the entire poem, most notably its central metaphor, the comparison of nature's beauty and its effects to alcohol and its numbing actions. The socially praised habit of watching nature is juxtaposed with the frowned upon practice of drinking. This comparison brings out surprising similarities. Both alcohol and nature can numb our senses. Both can make worries fall away, and both can cause saints to windows run. This metaphor is developed further with Dickinson's characteristic intense imagery. Her descriptions are somehow alive in spite of using barely any words, or maybe because of it. Knowing that the mind fills in gaps of its own volition, Dickinson paints a clearer picture by leaving room for imagination than she might have by dictating detail. The first lines conjure for us frothing pearly tankards and barrels of berries under the German sky. The second stanza presents the speaker as guiltily partaking of dew, once again putting dew, a symbol of purity, in a blamable context. One can picture the speaker reeling, almost flying, through time. The use of the word molten is worth noting. It asks the reader to round their lips and feel the word rolling off their tongue, adding a rich, viscous texture to the description of the sky. But the speaker's delight is not limited to the summer. She will but drink the more when snow falls like seraph's pure light and the bees and butterflies are gone. By placing the line, I shall but drink the more, right after when bees and butterflies have given up their share, Dickinson adds an extra layer of meaning. This line gives the impression of an almost greedy longing, the thought that as the bees leave, there will be more for herself. This isn't true, of course, and reflects how the metaphor of drink is now creeping into the speaker's view of nature, provoking an instinct to hoard. Although the poem begins with a clear and surprisingly accurate metaphor, the images become more and more disjointed as the poem progresses, reflecting the speaker's increasing drunkenness. In the line, "When landlords turn the drunken bee," it is not clear who the landlords are. By the end, the speaker is doing, or believes she will do, the impossible, leaning against the sun. The line may have multiple meanings. Either she is falling and tripping along the way at sunset, trying to keep herself upright by holding the sun, or she is simply leaning against a lamppost, which she construes as the sun due to reduced cognitive functions. Either way, we see once again that the speaker has lost the distinction between metaphor and reality. She is perfectly capable of processing the world around her, yet seems to be heavily drunk both to herself and to others. This raises the question of whether and how much the stories we tell can change our reality. This poem seems to suggest that they do, to a great extent. The central discord in the poem, however, between nature and liquor works against this conclusion. The use of the word "shall" in "I shall but drink the more" can signal intention and irrational resolution brought on by drunkenness, but also imagination, to which a natural environment is highly conducive. Perhaps the speaker is simply fantasizing about her delight in the winter, which would explain her lapses in judgment, as dreams tend to be somewhat less reasonable than reality. The theme of the poem, the beauty of nature, is common to Romanticism. However, unlike many of Dickinson's earlier poems on nature, in which she imitates to some degree the style of British Romantic poets, this one displays Dickinson's trademarks: short, succinct lines packed with images, and interesting use of dashes and capitalization, a lack of moral preaching, and a bedrock of conflict that adds a tangy flavor to the whole. Interestingly, this poem conflicts almost harshly with Dickinson's other favorite themes: death, grief, and immortality, which are brought out vividly in the next poem that we're going to look at. Poem 340. I felt a funeral in my brain. I felt a funeral in my brain, and mourners to and fro kept treading till it seemed that sense was breaking through. And when they all were seated, a service like a drum kept beating till I thought my mind was going numb. And then I heard them lift a box and creak across my soul. With those same boots of lead again, then space began to toll. As all the heavens were a bell and being but an ear, and I and silence some strange race, wrecked, solitary, here. And then a plank in reason broke, and I dropped down, and hit a world at every plunge, and finished knowing then. Let's take a moment here to silently, deeply